The distant rumble of thunder echoed across the vast Montana plains as Yates Jacobson guided his horse through the winding ravine. The year was 1875, and the territory was as wild as the storm brewing on the horizon. His calloused hands gripped the reins tightly, eyes scanning the rugged landscape for shelter from the impending downpour. That's when he saw her, a crumpled figure partially hidden among the sagebrush and rocks, unmoving against the darkening sky. Dismounting with practiced ease, Yates approached cautiously. His spurs clinked softly against the rocky ground as he neared. The woman was lying face down, her dress torn and mudded. Dark hair spilled across her shoulders, tangled with twigs and dust. When he gently turned her over, his breath caught in his throat. Her face was a canvas of bruises, purple shadows beneath her eyes, a split lip crusted with dried blood, and angry red marks across her cheekbone. Her eyes fluttered open, wide with terror when she saw him. She tried to scramble away, but pain visibly shot through her body. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged, only a silent gasp of fear. "You don't have to talk," Yates said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "Just breathe. I ain't gonna hurt you." The woman stared at him with wary eyes, her chest rising and falling rapidly as rain began to patter around them. Yates removed his duster and placed it gently around her shoulders. "Storm's coming," he said, his voice low and steady. "Got a cabin not far from here. Can you stand?" She attempted to rise but collapsed almost immediately. Without hesitation, Yates carefully lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, and he could feel her trembling against him as he carried her to his horse. "Name's Yates," he said, settling her in the saddle before mounting behind her. "Yates Jacobson, own a small spread just beyond those hills." The woman remained silent, her body rigid against his chest. Yates clicked his tongue, urging his horse forward as the rain began to fall in earnest. "That's all right," he said, though she hadn't responded. "No need for words right now." The ride to his cabin took longer than usual, with Yates keeping the pace gentle to avoid causing her additional pain. By the time they arrived, both were soaked through despite his duster. The cabin stood solitary against the landscape, smoke curling from the chimney where he'd left a low fire burning that morning. Inside, the warmth enveloped them immediately. Yates laid the woman gently on his bed, a simple wooden frame with a straw mattress covered in clean blankets. He moved efficiently, stoking the fire and putting water on to boil. "I'm going to fetch some dry clothes and bandages," he said, not expecting a response. "Then, if you'll allow it, I'd like to tend to those wounds." Her eyes followed his movements, still frightened but with a flicker of something else, perhaps the faintest glimmer of trust. Yates retrieved a clean shirt and a pair of worn but soft trousers, placing them beside her. "They'll be too big, but they're dry. I'll step outside while you change. Just stomp on the floor when you're decent." Yates stood on the porch, listening to the rain hammer against the roof. Inside, he heard the faint movements of the woman, followed eventually by a single, deliberate thud on the wooden floorboards. He returned to find her swimming in his clothes, her wet dress draped over a chair near the fire. She sat perched on the edge of the bed, her face partially obscured by her damp hair. In the firelight, Yates could better see the extent of her injuries, bruises in various stages of healing across her arms, a nasty gash on her forehead, and what appeared to be rope burns around her wrists. Anger flashed through him, but he kept his expression neutral as he approached with a basin of warm water and clean rags. He moved slowly, deliberately, showing her each item before using it. "This might sting a bit," he warned, dipping a cloth into the water. As he gently cleaned the dirt and blood from her face, she winced but didn't pull away. Her eyes, a deep amber color he could now see, remained fixed on him, watching his every move with the wariness of a wounded animal. "Been ranching here for 5 years now," Yates said conversationally, filling the silence. "Came west after the war, fought for the Union, though that don't matter much out here." He continued talking softly as he worked, telling her about his small herd of cattle, the harsh Montana winters, the beauty of the land in spring. By the time he finished dressing her wounds, some of the tension had left her body. Yates prepared a simple meal of beans, dried beef, and coffee, placing a bowl before her. "Should eat something if you can," he said. "Don't worry about talking, just eat, rest. You're safe here." She hesitated, then reached for the spoon with trembling fingers. Yates busied himself with his own meal, giving her space. They ate in silence as the storm raged outside, battering the small cabin with wind and rain. That night, Yates made himself a pallet on the floor near the fire, giving her the bed. Before settling down, he placed his revolver on the table within her reach. "If you need anything, I'm right here," he said, "and that's there if it helps you feel safer." In the middle of the night, Yates woke to the sound of quiet sobbing. He remained still, respecting her privacy as she cried, her breathing eventually steadying as she drifted back to sleep. Yates lay awake long after, staring at the ceiling, wondering what horrors this woman had endured and who had inflicted them. The morning brought clear skies and a subtle shift in their silent companionship. Yates found her standing by the window, gazing out at the mountains in the distance. Her hair was combed back, revealing more of her face still bruised but somehow transformed by the morning light. "Morning," Yates said, moving to the stove to revive the fire. "Coffee," to his surprise, she nodded. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant, the first deliberate communication since he'd found her. Over the next 3 days, a routine developed. Yates would tend to his chores, feeding livestock, checking fences, hunting for fresh meat while she remained in the cabin. He'd return to find small changes: dishes washed, floor swept, his shirts mended. She still hadn't spoken, but her eyes followed him with less fear now. On the 4th day, Yates returned from checking his cattle to find a pot of stew simmering on the stove. The woman stood nervously by the table, which she had set with his mismatched plates and utensils. "Smells mighty good," Yates said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. He washed up, then sat at the table, watching as she ladled stew into their bowls. "Thank you." She nodded again, the ghost of a smile touching her lips before disappearing. They ate in companionable silence, and when Yates finished, he pushed his chair back with a satisfied sigh. "Best meal I've had in years," he said truthfully. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need. No pressure to talk or explain, just know that you're safe here." That night, as Yates was preparing his pallet by the fire, he heard it so soft he almost thought he'd imagined it: "Tabitha." He turned slowly to find her sitting on the edge of the bed, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Tabitha Donovan," she repeated, her voice rough from disuse. "Tabitha," Yates said, testing the name. "It's good to meet you properly." "Thank you," she whispered, "for saving my life." Yates merely nodded, understanding the enormity of what it had taken for her to speak. "My husband," she continued after a moment, each word seeming to require great effort. "Ex-husband, he found me in Denver." Yates sat down on a chair, keeping a respectful distance but making it clear he was listening. "I left him 6 months ago. Her voice broke and she took a deep breath. "He beat me for 3 years, kept me locked up, finally escaped when he was on a cattle drive." Yates felt rage building inside him but kept his expression calm. "And he found you?" Tabitha nodded, her fingers unconsciously touching the fading bruises on her face. "Tracked me to Denver. Said he'd kill me for disgracing him, dragged me onto a train. I jumped off when it slowed for a bend. Don't remember much after that, just walking, hiding, then you found me." "You're remarkably brave," Yates said quietly. She looked up, surprise flickering across her face. "No one's ever called me brave before." "Well, you are. Most folks wouldn't survive what you've been through." They talked into the night, Tabitha sharing pieces of her story growing up in Kansas, marrying Wade Donovan at 18, enduring years of escalating abuse before finding the courage to flee. Yates listened, offering no judgment, just quiet support. "He'll be looking for me," she finally said, fear creeping back into her voice. "You're safe here," Yates assured her. "My land is remote, few people even know I'm here." But they both knew the words, however sincere, might not be enough. The next morning, Yates rode into the nearest town, a small settlement called Copper Creek, about 2 hours from his ranch. He needed supplies and information. The general store was nearly empty when he arrived, just old Mr. Peterson behind the counter and the sheriff nursing a cup of coffee by the potbelly stove. "Jacobson," Sheriff Miller nodded. "Don't see you much these days." "Been busy with the herd," Yates replied, gathering flour, coffee, and other essentials. "Anything new in these parts? Couple of strangers passed through last week." "Looking for a woman," Sheriff Miller said, watching Yates carefully. "Said she was his wife, ran off with their savings." Yates kept his expression neutral. "That's so," mean-looking fella had 2 others with him, asked a lot of questions. "They still around?" Yates asked, placing his items on the counter, left heading north, said they'd be back though. The sheriff sipped his coffee. "You seen any strangers out your way, Jacobson?" "No," Yates answered truthfully. Tabitha wasn't a stranger anymore. "Just the usual wolves, mountain lions, nearly lost a calf last week." Sheriff Miller nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Well, keep an eye out." Man seemed desperate to find his wife. Name was Donovan. Wade Donovan. Yates paid for his supplies, exchanged pleasantries with Mr. Peterson, and left without betraying his concern. He rode home at a faster pace than usual, vigilant for any sign of riders. When he returned, Tabitha was hanging laundry behind the cabin. She'd fashioned a clothesline between 2 trees, and his shirts flapped in the breeze alongside her now clean dress. She looked almost peaceful until she saw his expression. "He's here, isn't he?" she asked, her hands freezing on a wet sheet. "Was in town last week," Yates confirmed, unloading the supplies. "He and 2 others. They've moved north for now, but the sheriff said they'll be back." Tabitha's face drained of color. "I should go, I'm putting you in danger." "No," Yates said firmly, "you're not going anywhere, not alone." "You don't understand what he's capable of," she insisted, abandoning the laundry to follow him into the cabin. "I fought in the bloodiest war this country's ever seen," Yates replied, his voice low. "I've seen what men are capable of, but I've also seen what courage can do." He placed the packages on the table and turned to face her. "I won't let him hurt you again." Something shifted in Tabitha's eyes, a resolve hardening alongside the fear. "Then teach me to shoot." Yates blinked, surprised by the request. "You sure?" "I won't be helpless anymore," she said simply. That afternoon, Yates took Tabitha behind the cabin where he'd set up tin cans on a fallen log. He showed her how to hold his Winchester rifle, how to sight along the barrel, how to breathe before pulling the trigger. Her first shot went wild, the recoil nearly knocking her over. But she straightened, repositioned, and tried again. By sunset, she'd hit 3 cans, her determination never wavering despite the bruises forming on her shoulder from the rifle's kick. "Not bad for a first day," Yates said as they walked back to the cabin in the fading light. "Tomorrow I want to try the revolver," Tabitha replied, a new confidence in her voice. Over the next 2 weeks, Tabitha's transformation continued. Her bruises faded, her movements became more assured, and she practiced shooting daily. She insisted on learning other skills too: how to saddle a horse, how to navigate using the stars, how to start a fire from nearly nothing. Yates taught her everything he knew, impressed by her quick mind and determination. Their evenings were spent in conversation that grew increasingly comfortable. Yates shared stories of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his time in the Army, his dream of building a prosperous ranch. Tabitha spoke of her love of books, her desire to someday see the ocean, her talent for numbers which had once earned her praise from a schoolteacher before her father deemed further education unnecessary for a girl. One night, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Tabitha turned to him. "Why did you stop that day?" she asked. "Why help a stranger?" Yates considered the question. "My ma used to say that the measure of a man isn't what he does when everyone's watching, but what he does when no one is." Tabitha studied him in the fading light. "There aren't many men like you, Yates Jacobson, nor many women like you," he replied, holding her gaze. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken feelings. Tabitha looked away first, her cheeks coloring slightly. "I should check on the stew," she said, rising from her chair. Yates watched her go, aware that something fundamental had shifted between them. He remained on the porch until the first stars appeared, trying to make sense of the emotions stirring within him. The next day brought an unexpected visitor. Yates was repairing a fence when he heard hoofbeats approaching. He straightened, hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip, relaxing only when he recognized Seth Turner, a rancher whose property bordered his to the east. "Jacobson," Seth called, reining in his horse. "Been a while." "Turner," Yates nodded. "What brings you out this way?" "Thought you should know 3 men were asking about you in town yesterday. One called himself Donovan, said he was looking for his wife." Yates's jaw tightened. "What did you tell them?" "That I mind my own business," Seth replied, "but they were offering money for information." "Some folks might be more talkative." "Appreciate the warning," Yates said. Seth hesitated. "They don't look like lawmen, Yates. They look like trouble." "They are," Yates confirmed. "The woman there after she's here, her husband nearly beat her to death." Seth whistled low. "You need help." "Might," Yates admitted, "if they come this way." "I'll spread the word with those we can trust," Seth promised. "Most folks around here respect you. They won't side with strangers." After Seth departed, Yates hurried back to the cabin. Tabitha was inside, kneading bread dough with flour up to her elbows. One look at Yates's face told her everything. "They're close," she stated rather than asked, "in town yesterday, offering money for information." Tabitha wiped her hands on a cloth, her movements deliberate. "We need to prepare." They spent the afternoon reinforcing the cabin's defenses, boarding up the back window, positioning furniture to create barriers, discussing strategies for various scenarios. As they worked, Yates was struck by Tabitha's calm efficiency. The terrified woman he'd found in the ravine had been replaced by someone determined to fight for her freedom. That evening, as they ate a simple supper, Tabitha broke the comfortable silence. "I've been thinking," she said, setting down her fork. "If we survive this, after it's over, I want to file for divorce." Yates looked up, surprised. "Is that possible?" "In some territories, yes. Abandonment and cruelty are grounds in Montana." Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "I've lived in fear for too long. I want to be free of him legally, not just by running." "Then that's what we'll do," Yates promised. "First thing after this is settled." Tabitha smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face. "Thank you for believing in me." "Always," Yates replied, the word carrying more weight than he'd intended. Their eyes met across the table, and this time neither looked away. Slowly, Yates reached across and covered her hand with his. Tabitha turned her palm upward, intertwining their fingers. "I never thought I could trust a man again," she whispered. "I'd never give you reason not to," he answered simply. They sat like that, hands joined, hearts gradually aligning until the fire burned low in the hearth. The confrontation they'd been preparing for came 3 days later. Yates was chopping wood while Tabitha practiced with the revolver when they heard horses approaching. 3 riders appeared on the ridge overlooking the cabin, silhouetted against the morning sky. "Get inside," Yates said quietly, setting down his axe. Tabitha nodded, slipping the revolver into the pocket of her skirt before walking calmly to the cabin. Yates remained in the yard, one hand resting casually on his belt near his holster. The riders descended the ridge slowly, deliberately. The man in the lead was tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick mustache and cold eyes. He wore expensive clothes that seemed at odds with the rugged terrain, a city man's idea of Western attire. "That's him," Tabitha whispered from inside the cabin, positioned by the window as they'd planned. Yates gave an imperceptible nod, keeping his eyes on the approaching men. "You Jacobson," the lead rider called when they were within speaking distance. "I am," Yates confirmed. "This is private property." "Name's Wade Donovan," the man said, ignoring the implied warning. "I'm looking for my wife. Been told she might be here." No wife of yours here, Yates replied evenly. Wade's face darkened. Tabitha Donovan, dark hair about so high, he indicated with his hand. Ran off with my money and jewelry. She's a thief and a liar. Like I said, Yates repeated, no wife of yours here. The two men flanking Wade shifted in their saddles, hands moving closer to their weapons. They were clearly hired guns, hard-faced men with calculating eyes. I know she's here, Jacobson, Wade snarled, dropping the pretense of civility. That interfering storekeeper's wife described the dress you bought last week, perfect size for my Tabitha. Yates remained impassive. I think you should leave now, Wade smiled unpleasantly. I don't think I will, not without what's mine. He turned to his companions. Check the cabin. One of the men began to dismount but froze when Yates drew his revolver with lightning speed. Touch that door, Yates said softly, and you're a dead man. The standoff stretched for several tense seconds before the cabin door opened. Tabitha stepped out, revolver held steadily in both hands. Hello, Wade, she said, her voice remarkably calm. Wade's eyes widened, first in triumph, then in confusion at the sight of the weapon in her hands. Put that down, woman. You don't know how to use it. I do now, Tabitha replied, and I'm not going back with you, not today, not ever. Wade laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. You always were stubborn, but you're still my wife and you're coming home where you belong. No, Tabitha said simply. I'm not your property, I never was. Wade's face contorted with rage. You ungrateful whore. After everything I provided, you provided beatings and fear, Tabitha cut him off. And I'm done with both. Wade turned to his companions. Get her, kill him if he interferes. What happened next unfolded in a blur of motion and sound. The hired guns reached for their weapons, but Yates was faster, firing twice in rapid succession. One man cried out, clutching his shoulder as he tumbled from his horse. The other returned fire, his bullet splintering the doorframe inches from Tabitha's head. Wade used the distraction to draw his own weapon, aiming at Yates. Tabitha's revolver cracked loudly, her bullet grazing Wade's arm. He roared in pain and anger, swinging his gun toward her. Yates launched himself forward, tackling Wade from his horse. They hit the ground hard, wrestling for control of Wade's revolver. Behind them, the remaining hired gun exchanged shots with Tabitha, who had taken cover inside the doorway. Wade was stronger, leveraging his weight to pin Yates momentarily. His fist connected with Yates's jaw, sending stars exploding across his vision. Wade raised his gun, triumph gleaming in his eyes, only to howl in agony as a bullet tore through his hand, the revolver spinning away into the dirt. Tabitha stood over them, her weapon trained steadily on Wade's face. Get off him, she commanded. Wade stared up at her in disbelief. You shot me, he said incredulously. You actually shot me. I'll do worse if you don't move. Now. Wade slowly rolled away from Yates, cradling his bleeding hand. The remaining hired gun, seeing the tide turn, raised his hands in surrender. Yates got to his feet, reclaiming his dropped revolver. The first man Yates had shot was sitting up, pale but alive, his wound not life-threatening. The second man remained on his horse, hands visible. It's over, Wade, Yates said. You lost. She's my wife, Wade spat, glaring hatefully at Tabitha. The law's on my side. Not in Montana territory, came a new voice. Sheriff Miller rode into the yard, rifle at the ready, with Seth Turner and two other local ranchers behind him. Not when you come onto a man's property looking for trouble. Seth had kept his promise, alerting the sheriff and bringing reinforcements. Wade's face fell as he realized he was outnumbered. These men attacked me, he tried, gesturing at Yates. I was just trying to recover my runaway wife. That's not how I see it, Sheriff Miller replied, dismounting. I see 3 armed men trespassing and threatening decent folks. He looked at Tabitha. Madam, are you being held here against your will? No, Sheriff, Tabitha answered firmly. I'm here by choice. This man, she indicated Wade, is my husband in name only. He nearly killed me. I fled to save my life. Sheriff Miller nodded, taking in the fading bruises still visible on her face. Mr. Donovan, you and your friends are under arrest for trespassing, assault, and attempted murder. As the sheriff and ranchers disarmed and bound the three men, Tabitha lowered her revolver, suddenly trembling. Yates moved to her side, gently taking the weapon. "You did it," he said softly. "You stood your ground." She looked up at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "We did it." Wade glared at them as the sheriff hauled him to his feet. "This isn't over, Tabitha. You're still my wife." "Not for long," she replied, finding her strength again. "I'm filing for divorce, Wade. You'll never control me again." The defeat in Wade's eyes was palpable as the sheriff led him away. The hired guns followed, mounted on their horses but with hands tied to their saddle horns. Seth and the other ranchers accompanied them, ensuring no escape attempts. Sheriff Miller paused before mounting his own horse. "I'll need statements from both of you. Come to town tomorrow." When they nodded, he continued, "And madam, if you're serious about that divorce, Judge Parker will be in Copper Creek next month. He's fair-minded about such matters, especially with evidence of cruelty." "Thank you, Sheriff," Tabitha said. "I'll be there." After the riders disappeared over the ridge, Yates and Tabitha stood in the sudden silence, the tension slowly draining from their bodies. "Are you hurt?" Tabitha asked, gently touching the bruise forming on Yates's jaw. "Nothing serious," he assured her. She shook her head. "Just shaken." They moved into the cabin, where Yates built up the fire while Tabitha prepared coffee with hands that gradually steadied. The familiar routine brought comfort after the chaos. "I shot him," Tabitha said suddenly, sitting at the table with her coffee cup cradled between her palms. "I actually pulled the trigger." "You saved my life," Yates replied, "and your own. I never thought I could. All those years I was so afraid." She looked up at him, wonder in her expression. "But when I saw him about to shoot you, something changed. I wasn't afraid anymore, I was angry." Yates smiled slightly. "Anger can be stronger than fear. Is it over, truly over?" "He's going to jail for a long time," Yates said, "and you'll get your divorce. It's over, Tabitha." She absorbed this, emotions playing across her face, relief, disbelief, and finally a tentative joy. "I'm free." "Yes," Yates agreed, "free to do whatever you choose." Tabitha studied him, something new dawning in her eyes. "What if I choose to stay?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Yates set down his coffee cup, heart pounding. "Here, on the ranch." "With you," she clarified softly. Yates moved around the table, kneeling beside her chair to be at eye level. "Tabitha, these past weeks." She smiled at his uncharacteristic loss for words. "I know," she whispered. "I feel it too." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Yates leaned forward. Their lips met in a gentle kiss, tentative at first, then deepening as Tabitha's arms wrapped around his neck. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I never thought I'd find this," Tabitha said, resting her forehead against his. "Never thought I'd trust again or feel safe. You gave me that, Yates." "You gave yourself that," he corrected. "Your courage, your strength, they were always inside you. I just helped you find them." The next day, they rode to Copper Creek together to give their statements. The town buzzed with gossip about the confrontation, but the general sentiment favored Yates and Tabitha. Wade Donovan had made no friends during his brief stay, and his hired guns had threatened the blacksmith's son in a dispute over a horseshoe. While Yates spoke with the sheriff, Tabitha visited the lawyer's office to begin divorce proceedings. The lawyer, an elderly man named Mr. Hammond, listened to her story with growing indignation. "Despicable behavior," he muttered, making notes. "With witnesses to his assault and the sheriff's testimony about yesterday's events, you have a strong case for divorce on grounds of extreme cruelty. Judge Parker is a reasonable man. I believe he'll grant your petition." "How long will it take?" Tabitha asked. "The judge arrives in 4 weeks. If all goes well, you could be legally free within a month." The news lifted Tabitha's spirits considerably. When she emerged from the lawyer's office, she found Yates waiting outside the sheriff's office, engaged in conversation with a woman about her age. "Tabitha," Yates called, smiling. "Come meet Eleanor Turner, Seth's wife." Alina Turner was a warm, practical-looking woman with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "Mr. Jacobson has told me about your ordeal," she said. "You're very brave." "Thank you," Tabitha replied, somewhat taken aback by the genuine admiration in the other woman's voice. "I've been telling Mrs. Turner that you're staying at my ranch until your divorce is settled," Yates explained, a question in his eyes. Tabitha nodded, understanding his concern for her reputation. "Yes, though I'll need proper accommodations in town for when the judge arrives." "Nonsense," Alina interjected. "You'll stay with us. Our daughter just married and moved to Helena, so her room is empty. It would be my pleasure to host you when the time comes." Tabitha was overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. "That's very generous." "It's what neighbors do," Alina said simply. "And any woman brave enough to stand up to a brute like Yates Donovan is someone I'd be proud to call friend." By the time they returned to the ranch that evening, Tabitha had acquired not only a temporary home for the judge's visit, but also her first real friend in Montana territory. Alina had introduced her to several other women in town, all of whom had offered support and friendship. "It's strange," Tabitha said as they rode home under a sky streaked with sunset colors. "I spent so many years isolated, convinced I was alone in the world. And now, suddenly, there are people who care." "You'll find that's how it is out here," Yates replied. "Life is hard enough without making it harder for each other. Most folks understand that." They rode in companionable silence for a while, each lost in thought. As they crested the final hill overlooking Yates's land, Tabitha reined in her horse, gazing at the cabin below. "It looks different somehow," she said. "How so?" Yates asked, stopping beside her. "When you first brought me here, I saw it as a temporary shelter. Now," she smiled, turning to him, "now it feels like it could be home." Yates reached across the space between their horses, taking her hand. "I'd like that very much, Tabitha, but I want you to be sure. You've been through so much and you're just beginning to find your freedom. I don't want to rush you into anything." Tabitha squeezed his hand. "You're not like him, Yates. You never tried to own me or control me. You taught me to shoot, to defend myself. You gave me choices." Her voice softened. "That's why I can choose you freely with my whole heart." In the golden light of sunset, Yates leaned across and kissed her, a promise sealed between them. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. Yates and Tabitha fell into a comfortable routine of shared work and deepening affection. She proved to be not only capable around the ranch but innovative, suggesting improvements to the chicken coop that increased egg production and devising a more efficient system for storing preserved foods. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, planning for the future, expanding the herd, adding rooms to the cabin, perhaps planting an orchard. They spoke of these things as certainties, their lives now irrevocably intertwined. 3 days before Judge Parker was due to arrive in Copper Creek, Alina Turner came to visit, bringing fabric for a new dress for Tabitha to wear to court. "First impressions matter," Alina insisted, laying out the deep blue cotton on the table. "Judge Parker is fair, but he's also traditional. A respectable appearance will help your case." As Alina took Tabitha's measurements, the women chatted about town news. Wade and his hired guns remained in the jail in Helena, awaiting trial for multiple offenses. The charges had grown after other victims came forward, including a shopkeeper Wade had threatened in Denver and a young woman who'd been assaulted by one of the hired guns during their pursuit of Tabitha. "No one expects them to see freedom anytime soon," Alina reported with satisfaction. "Especially not after what Sheriff Miller found in Wade's belongings." "What was that?" Tabitha asked. "A wanted poster. Seems your husband is wanted in Kansas for embezzlement and in Missouri for fraud. He's been running from the law himself while chasing you." The irony wasn't lost on Tabitha, who shook her head in disbelief. "All those years, he made me feel worthless while presenting himself as respectable." "Men like that are all facade," Alina said wisely, pinning the fabric, "but you found a good one in Yates Jacobson. The whole town's noticed how he looks at you." Tabitha blushed, glancing toward the window where Yates could be seen chopping wood. I've been very fortunate. It's not fortune, Alina corrected gently. It's what you deserve. Every woman deserves kindness and respect. She finished the final measurement and straightened. There. I'll have this ready for you by the end of the week. You'll look beautiful for court and for whatever celebration might follow. Her knowing smile made Tabitha blush deeper, but she didn't deny the implication. Judge Parker arrived in Copper Creek on a Tuesday, bringing with him the formal authority of territorial law. Tabitha moved temporarily to the Turner homestead as planned, while Yates remained at his ranch, both maintaining proprieties for the sake of her divorce case. The hearing was held in the town's small church, the only building large enough to accommodate the proceedings. Interest in the case had spread throughout the area, drawing a crowd of spectators. Tabitha sat beside Mr. Hammond in her new blue dress, hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. Across the aisle, Wade's court-appointed lawyer looked bored, knowing his client's case was weak. Wade himself remained in custody in Helena, represented in absentia. Judge Parker, a stern-faced man with penetrating eyes and a reputation for wisdom, called the court to order promptly at 10 o'clock. The proceedings moved more swiftly than Tabitha had anticipated. Mr. Hammond presented her petition for divorce on grounds of extreme cruelty, offering Sheriff Miller's testimony about Wade's violent behavior at Yates's ranch, and sworn statements from witnesses who had seen her bruises when Yates first brought her to town for medical attention. Wade's lawyer made only token objections, acknowledging privately to the judge that his client's pending criminal charges made defending the marriage untenable. By noon, Judge Parker was ready to render his decision. Having reviewed the evidence and testimonies presented, he announced to the hushed church, this court finds sufficient grounds to dissolve the marriage between Tabitha Donovan and Wade Donovan on the basis of extreme cruelty. The divorce is hereby granted. He struck his gavel once, the sound reverberating through the wooden building. Mrs. Donovan, you are at liberty to resume your maiden name should you wish. Thank you, Your Honor, Tabitha replied, her voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. I would like to be known as Tabitha Davis again. Judge Parker nodded. So ordered. This court is adjourned. The spectators erupted in conversation as the judge gathered his papers. Tabitha sat motionless, trying to absorb the reality of what had just occurred, free. Legally, officially free. Mr. Hammond patted her hand. Congratulations, Miss Davis, a new beginning. Alina was the first to reach her as she stood, enveloping her in a warm embrace. You did it, she whispered. I'm so proud of you. Others followed, townspeople who had come to support her, women who had befriended her, even Sheriff Miller who offered a gruff but sincere congratulation. And then the crowd parted, and there was Yates, standing in the church doorway, hat in hand. Their eyes met across the room, and Tabitha moved toward him as if drawn by an invisible force. It's done, she said simply when she reached him. Yates nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. I heard, congratulations, Miss Davis. Thank you, Mr. Jacobson. A smile played at the corners of her mouth. Though I don't intend to remain Miss Davis for long if a certain rancher I know has similar intentions to mine. Yates's face broke into a rare, full smile. He most certainly does. Outside the church, in full view of the entire town, Yates Jacobson dropped to one knee before Tabitha Davis. I had a speech prepared, he admitted, looking suddenly boyish despite his weathered features. But I find I can't remember a word of it. All I know is that I love you, Tabitha, and I want to spend my life with you not as your protector or savior, but as your partner, your equal, your devoted husband. Will you marry me? Yes, Tabitha answered without hesitation. With all my heart, yes. The townspeople cheered as Yates rose and swept her into his arms, their kiss a promise of the future they would build together. They were married 2 weeks later in the same church, with Alina Turner as matron of honor and Seth Turner standing up for Yates. Judge Parker, who had delayed his departure to perform the ceremony, pronounced them husband and wife on a perfect autumn day with golden leaves swirling outside the windows. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, with tables set up outside the church and everyone contributing food and music. Tabitha, radiant in a cream-colored dress Alina had helped her make, moved among the guests with a confidence that would have been unimaginable months before. As sunset approached, Yates found her deep in conversation with Alina and two other women. He approached respectfully, hat once again in hand. "May I steal my wife away for a moment?" he asked with a smile. The women exchanged knowing looks as Tabitha took his arm. Yates led her away from the crowd toward a quiet spot beneath an old cottonwood tree. "Are you happy?" he asked, his expression suddenly serious. Tabitha reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible." "I have something for you," Yates said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small, worn leather book. "It belonged to my mother, her journal. She wrote about her life, her hopes, her marriage to my father, which was a true partnership." He placed it in Tabitha's hands. "I want you to have it not just as a keepsake, but as a promise. Our marriage will always be a partnership. Your voice will always be heard, your choices respected." Tears welled in Tabitha's eyes as she accepted the precious gift. "I'll treasure it always," she whispered. "And I make you the same promise. We'll build our life together, as equals." They returned to the celebration hand in hand, stepping into the circle of dancers as the fiddler struck up a lively tune. Under the stars, surrounded by their new community, they danced not as the wounded and the rescuer, but as two people who had found in each other the strength to create a new beginning. 3 years later, Tabitha stood on the porch of the expanded ranch house, watching as Yates taught their 2-year-old daughter, Emma, to feed the chickens. The little girl's delighted laughter floated across the yard as the hens pecked enthusiastically at the grain in her small hands. The ranch had prospered beyond their expectations. With Tabitha's head for figures and Yates's ranching knowledge, they had tripled the size of their herd and added new buildings: a proper barn, a smokehouse, a bunkhouse for the 2 hired hands who now helped manage the growing operation. Their home had grown to 3 new rooms added to the original cabin, including a nursery for Emma and the baby boy due to arrive in the spring. The property now boasted a thriving vegetable garden, an orchard of young fruit trees, and even a small schoolroom where Tabitha taught reading and arithmetic to Emma and the children from neighboring ranches. Life wasn't without challenges. The harsh Montana winters tested their resolve each year. Occasional disputes with cattle rustlers required vigilance, and once, a drifter passing through had recognized Tabitha from her Denver days, bringing unwelcome memories of the past. But these trials only strengthened the bond between them. Each obstacle faced together reinforced the foundation of trust and respect they had built. Wade Donovan was a distant memory now. News had reached them last year of his death in prison. A fight with another inmate had ended fatally for both men. Tabitha had received the news with quiet reflection rather than celebration, acknowledging the closing of a painful chapter without allowing it to overshadow her present happiness. As she watched her husband and daughter, Tabitha's hand instinctively moved to her swollen belly, feeling the baby's strong kicks. So much had changed since that day Yates found her broken and silent in the ravine. Sometimes it seemed like another lifetime, another woman entirely. Yates looked up, catching her eye across the yard. Even now, after 3 years of marriage, his smile still made her heart quicken. He whispered something to Emma, who turned and waved enthusiastically at her mother. "Mama, chicken's hungry," the little girl called. "I see that, sweetheart," Tabitha called back, smiling. "You're doing a fine job feeding them." Yates lifted Emma onto his shoulders and walked toward the house, the little girl giggling as she held onto his hat. When they reached the porch, he set her down gently. "Why don't you go find your doll, Pumpkin?" he suggested. "I need to talk to Mama for a minute." Emma nodded solemnly, her dark curls so like Tabitha's bouncing as she ran inside. Yates turned to his wife, his expression curious. "You've been standing out here a while. Everything all right?" Tabitha smiled, taking his hand and placing it on her belly where the baby was kicking vigorously. "Just thinking about how far we've come, how lucky we are." Yates's face softened as he felt his son's movements. "Not luck," he said, echoing words from long ago. "Courage, yours most of all." "Ours," she corrected, leaning into his embrace. "I wouldn't be here without you, Yates. You found me when I was lost, gave me space to breathe, to heal. You showed me what love should be. And you showed me how to open my heart again," he replied, kissing her forehead. "After the war, I thought I'd live out my days alone on this ranch. Now I can't imagine life without you and Emma and this little cowboy." He patted her belly gently. "Or cowgirl," Tabitha teased. "Don't assume." Yates laughed. "Cowgirl would be just fine, too." They stood together on the porch, watching the sun begin its descent toward the mountains. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully on land that was truly their own, not just legally, but in the deep, meaningful sense of having built something together from nearly nothing. Emma emerged from the house, clutching her beloved rag doll. "Story time, Mama," she asked hopefully. "Of course, my love," Tabitha answered, allowing Yates to help her into the rocking chair he'd made for her first birthday as his wife. Emma climbed carefully onto her lap, mindful of the baby as she'd been taught. Yates sat on the porch steps beside them, his presence a comforting constant. "What story would you like to hear?" Tabitha asked, smoothing her daughter's wild curls. "The one about how you and Papa met," Emma said decisively. It was her favorite tale, though Tabitha always told a carefully edited version appropriate for young ears. "Well," Tabitha began, meeting Yates's eyes over their daughter's head, "once upon a time there was a woman who was very sad and very hurt. She thought she would never be happy again, but then a kind cowboy found her." As Tabitha's voice wove the familiar story, a tale of rescue, healing, and love found in unexpected circumstances, Yates watched his wife and daughter, his heart full. The bruised, silent woman he discovered that stormy day had blossomed into this confident, vibrant person who held their world together with strength and grace. When the story reached its happy ending, and they built a beautiful home and had a wonderful little girl named Emma, their daughter clapped her hands in delight. "And lived happily ever after," Emma added, completing the tale as she always did. "Yes, sweetheart," Tabitha confirmed, catching Yates's hand and squeezing it gently. "They lived happily ever after." As the sun set over their thriving ranch, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the promise of those words seemed to hover in the air around them, not as a fairy tale ending, but as a reality they continued to build together, day by day, breath by breath.